Brandon Gonsalves. I'm a board certified autonomous nurse practitioner in Florida, and I'm the founder of K&B Medical Center. So you are now on the Alpha NP podcast. This has been long overdue. A lot of you guys are following me on Instagram or just friends, patients in my practice in various states. And we're finally here. We got this content going, and this is episode 1. So what I want to do is I kind of just wanted to, we went back and forth on how we were going to do this. I really just wanted to have a good starting episode for you to understand who I am, what is my practice, what are we going to be talking about, and everything else. And then really on episode 2 is when we're going to dive into the content, different topics, everything that'll be happening, as well as the different types of guests that'll be on. So a little bit about my practice. We are more focused in the direct primary care space. Of what I focus on specifically is everything men's health. So a lot of testosterone, a lot of anabolics, a lot of peptides, that whole men's health, anti-aging, or like I like to kind of call it, performance medicine space. That is, I'd say, about 90% of what I do on the daily. If you're following me on Instagram, you see my content of what we're pretty much doing. And obviously Candy's doing all her aesthetics, cosmetic, injectables, and procedures. That's something else we offer. Some of those topics will be discussed, but for majority of it, we're going to be diving into a lot of the men's health stuff. So one of the first things I definitely want to dive into is, this space. I did not just come into this space after I became a nurse practitioner or while I was in nurse practitioner school. My story is pretty interesting, and I think it differs from a lot of physicians, NPs, and PAs that own practices, especially in men's health. My journey probably began around the age, I want to say, of 19, maybe 20, 19 into 20, right after high school. So it was probably around right when I was into college. I had been on testosterone since I was probably 19 years old from the black market. Underground, this was no medical guidance. I wasn't even in nursing school yet, let alone even the thought of nurse practitioner school. I had just gone away to college. I was so interesting. I started this probably, I'd say, the summer into college using just testosterone. This was obviously underground, Chinese stuff, black market. And obviously from there it escalated throughout college, of undergrad at least, to 4 years. I was experimenting with everything from different testosterone esters to trenbolone, anadrol, anavar, mast, equipoise, growth hormone, various peptides. And this was at the time before medical peptides were even a thing. This was when it was all purely research use, and there was no such thing as pharmaceutical peptides. The healthcare and medical industry they didn't even get into that space yet with the compounding pharmacies. It was extremely, extremely limited. So peptides weren't even a thing. Where I'm talking about this episode now, we're aware that these peptides are everywhere. Everyone's talking about peptides. They're all over TikTok and Instagram, and everyone's a professional now or an expert on this topic. So that was roughly around that time. I had probably been using this stuff throughout the 4 years of college, then post when I was working as a registered nurse for 3 years, I was still using this, but I think I want to say around 2020 is when I made the transition. I was in fear of side effects, infertility. I dealt with gynecomastia, which we'll even talk about that a little bit. But that's around the time when I had actually gone to a clinic and I said, okay, enough is enough. I've had my fun with this, but I'm in fear. I want to run labs. I want to be healthy. I just graduated as a nurse. I remember I was working during COVID when I transitioned to an actual clinic with medical oversight, and a lot changed. Around that time, I had my fun in college for about, I'd say, five and a half years of, just blasting everything. It was fun, but you reach a point when you're like, this isn't, my blood pressure was through the roof. I remember I took my blood pressure one day. I was working in the ER, and I took my blood pressure, and it was like 160 over 90. And, I'm like 20s, low 20s, 23 maybe. Yeah, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, maybe like 24, then 25. And I remember it was through the roof. And I was like, okay, enough is enough. Like, this is now getting worried. I was dealing with gynecomastia, severe gynecomastia, cystic acne, pretty much everything that could go wrong with using an anabolic, I was experiencing. Later down the road, I ended up having gynecomastia surgery not long from that. I have the incision still. They went under my nipple a lot. They gave me the option of did they want to go in the armpit or under the nipple. And I was like, well, I remember I was talking to a general surgeon. And I was like, which is going to be the best way for you to go in and be able to take this tissue out where I'm not going to need a follow-up surgery? Or I was going to still continue testosterone. I always knew I was always going to be on TRT. So I wanted to make sure that I went the best route to without having to revisit a surgery down the road. And he was like, that's going to be under the nipple. So I can get in there and I can see all the mammary tissue, the gland fully, and remove it almost at 100% out. So that was an interesting journey there. But not to get sidetracked, back to the whole medical transition. So I was with the clinic and now I'm down using about, 200 milligrams a week of testosterone. I was taking some anastrozole, very low dose. I was more stable. I stopped having side effects. I honestly felt better. Yes, I wasn't maintaining the muscle mass that I was when I was obviously in college, but it was still more of a healthier transition, especially with life. I was now going to NP school, that whole type of deal. So there was a lot going on. It was definitely the better choice for me at that time. So we're continuing on now. I've been on medical testosterone. So now I'm seeing and I'm like, oh man, like this is too when the whole TRT thing was still new as well, because it kind of boomed right at the start of COVID. Like prior to, I'd say 2019, to get testosterone was a nightmare. It was just anytime you went to an office, a doctor's office, it was viewed very negatively. Like there was no, oh, I'm going to get online, I'm going to get a telehealth company, or there's all these individuals that are licensed that are, experts in this space. It really wasn't that. Like you went to your primary and you basically had to be bottomed out to get it, or your endocrinologist, and they didn't really want to write for it, not really urology. And if they did put you on it, it was like 150 milligrams every 14 days. Like it was just diabolical treatments. I mean, completely garbage. A lot of the patients felt worse on these protocols than they did before they even started because of the swings with the hormones. So I'm watching this all take place. I think I was just about to start Nurse Practitioner school, and I was like, man, this clinic, there were clinics in South Florida. There were only a few, but they were booming. Like they were blowing up. I mean, everybody was transitioning. There was this period where I watched like the rampant use of like anabolic steroids transition to medical supervision. Like even the guys that were still taking steroids, they were still going to a clinic just for the quarterly labs or, the biannual labs just to get their pharmaceutical grade testosterone. Some of them were still supplementing their black market stuff, but majority were pulling over. I think the space became very health conscious around that time of COVID and post-COVID when these clinics opened up. Now, obviously there was the whole price issue, but we'll dive into that. So aside from that, I'm watching this all happen. I have known testosterone inside and out. Even to the point in college, I was making it literally. I wasn't even getting it at that point. I was literally making my own testosterone. I was sourcing my raws. I was a dumb college kid, cooking it up sterilely. So I was very familiar with all this process on how this worked. To be very clear, I do not recommend that. I look back as a huge regret. It was a chapter of my life. It taught me a lot. It is honestly the driving factor of what led me into becoming a men's health nurse practitioner, opening my own practice. I watched a lot of the issues in this space as the medical field started to accept testosterone. There were still a lot of issues. The protocols were fucked up. The dosing was all jacked up. This was just not being done right. Like patients were having to jump through hoops to get a testosterone prescription. And then the problem was a lot of them weren't. They were like, you know what? Screw this. I'm just getting it elsewhere. And I was like, this is not right. They're listening to dudes in the gym that don't know what they're talking about. There was no risk mitigation there. People are just taking it. When there's no oversight, there's no one liable. Versus when you come to a clinic, you are going to do your labs or I'm discontinuing your treatment. Or if your labs come jacked up, we are going to be rerunning labs. Like I am holding you accountable. If there are labs that are through the roof, if there are liver functions that are messed up, if we're sending you out for calcium scores, coronary artery scans, ultrasounds of the carotid, whatever it may be, whether you're just a standard testosterone patient or you're more one of my advanced concierge patients, there is a level of oversight at depending on the package or plan you're with in my practice. So this definitely holds the patient accountable, and that was something that interested me. I was fascinated on how this was running. So as I'm going through school, I'm now in nurse practitioner school. It's about 2 years long. And before I even graduated, we were already rolling. Candy had graduated. So she had her license. We had everything already rolling. She was doing the prescribing. I was already building out the back end of this so that when I graduated, I was going 100 miles an hour. So we had a really good dynamic there, and I had done a lot of research prior to this, and I was just fed up with the way these clinics were being ran. Majority of these clinics were being ran by dudes in polos that they're not even licensed. You know what I'm saying? They just see dollar signs. They have no idea what they're doing. They're taking advantage of physicians and nurse practitioners that come out of school or are burnt out in the hospital, and they throw them a nice little salary and they promise them the world. And that's pretty much how these clinics are ran. I mean, you guys know a lot of them in South Florida. They are not physician, nurse practitioner, PA owned and operated, which was a big issue with me. I was watching them, a lot of these, some of these clinics they were using like research use. Like some of these companies they were using over here, they were literally using research use. And their physicians and nurse practitioners had no idea what they were doing. They were just going along with it because they're on salary and it sounds great. And these clinics had absurd protocols and responsibility they were putting on these individuals that, it was just a disaster. I was not here for it. When you come to see me, and it was a big reason of why I started K&B Medical Center, why I became the Alpha NP, how we built this brand up, leading to now a podcast for extended content like this, where you guys can really hear how I feel without the reel being cut off at 60 seconds. And Mark's like, dude, you got to get all this in. We need to keep the reel short for the algorithm. I can talk now for an hour if I want and answer all your questions in depth. So yeah, that was a big problem that I had with it, and I saw this opportunity. I said, a lot of these clinics are not physician, nurse practitioner, PA owned and operated. They're owned by some dude that's a salesman. That's all he really is. He's a salesman. He has no business discussing these topics. And aside from that, he has no business implementing protocols that, unfortunately, a lot of licensed individuals just go with the flow. They get their paycheck, they go with the flow, and they don't realize the liability they take in this space. So that is I'd say a really good distinction of how I got to where I'm at with myself as a nurse practitioner, as a practice owner, as, specializing in this space specifically of men's health and all the directions it goes. It was definitely the start of where I came from with this. I saw so many things wrong. I dealt with so many side effects. The gynecomastia, the early hair loss, the cystic acne and the journey with Accutane for a brief amount. The rages, the absolute roid rages that I experienced messing with compounds and hormones that I had no business touching. We always joke around, and we see on Instagram Trenbolone. I would not touch Trenbolone with a 50-foot pole after what it went through. From arguments to, it was just you are not yourself. And that was my experience. You know what I'm saying? That was just my experience. I know a lot of guys that tolerate it or claim they tolerate Trenbolone very well. But at 22 years old in college in a dorm on 200, 300 milligrams of Trenbolone, 300 milligrams of Test, 50 milligrams of Anavar, it was not a good concoction brewing. I did not handle it very well. And I know there's going to be a lot of guys that say, oh, I can tolerate that just fine. A lot of guys do. But at some point you don't, whether it's physiologically on your labs or it's mentally and what it's doing to your brain and your day to day. So yeah, big reason why I started this practice was to help a lot of these men hear my story, be able to ask me questions. You can't even go to a lot of primaries. You go to a primary and you tell them you take Anavar and they don't even know what you're talking about. I had a patient the other day. This is just off note. She was being managed phenomenally well with me on retatrutide. She went back to her endocrinologist and was like, my A1Cs are beautiful. I'm not having side effects. The endocrinologist had a stroke. She didn't even know what retatrutide was. But the patient was not tolerating the Wegovy that she had put her on and that whole type of deal. Semaglutide is now a little more outdated. And the patient didn't know what to do, and she basically fired her endocrinologist. She was like, I'm not doing this. Like, the retatrutide's working great. And, the endocrinologist was not having it. So the patient fired the endocrinologist at that point, and is now with me for pretty much blood sugar management. We can have these conversations. The patients can understand the risks. They can understand what medications, how they've been studied, where are they at in clinical trials, are they FDA approved? The fact of the matter that not a single compounded medication is FDA approved, and all these type of things at the end of the day that the patient can make the decision. So many guys come to me and they're so tired with, you go to your primary, you go to your endocrinologist, you go to your urologist, and it's the same thing. Your levels are fine, or they could use some room for improvement, but you're not there yet. No one ever talks about the discrepancies with this range. Let's use Quest, for example. 250 nanograms per deciliter to 1100. That range is absurd. It doesn't account for body weight. It doesn't account for activity level. It doesn't account for age. There's so many things wrong there. And majority of insurance-based practices, they're just not here for the discussion. They don't want to deal with it. And I understand why, which we won't go into now, but we'll save that for another topic, but that's a question people ask, why don't they want to manage this, or why aren't they handling it how you are? Why do I got to come to you and pay cash? It's very good questions. We will touch on them. But I just wanted you guys to really understand my story. When this started, I think 19 years old was the first injection. I literally remember standing in my parents' house. I would wake up super early before school. I can't even find fucking needles. So I was driving down the road. I was in Homestead, Florida. I was going on Chrome Avenue to the feed store, buying needles for the horses. And at the time, they only had like 18 gauge. So I'm using this fucking harpoon of a needle. I don't even remember where I was getting the testosterone from. It was definitely overseas, some sketchy shit. And I'm drawing it up. And, at the time I was nervous. I knew nothing about aspirating. And you just hear that, you hear, if you get it in your bloodstream, you're going to drop dead. So I remember injecting in the bathroom, locking the door before school, like breaking out into a full sweat, nervous, using this 2-inch horse needle, 18 gauge, to inject the testosterone sip, I think at the time. And it was just one thing after another. I remember the first time I got trend cough standing in my parents' bathroom. I thought I was dead. I remember hacking up a fucking lung, just like on the floor, bright red, full sweat, and I knew what it was, but the first time you get it, it is terrifying. You feel like you are dying for a good 60 seconds. And it was all these steps kind of, like I said, have carved the way, which pushed my, I guess you could say, influence and knowledge to be able to step into this space, talk to guys about testosterone, kind of push them away from anabolics unless it's, under medical supervision at significantly reduced doses, that whole type of thing. So it's definitely been a ride. We can always talk about this. Maybe I'll talk about it more down the road on an episode about the whole sourcing it and that whole deal, how it was in college. And I made some of my best friends that I've ever made were because of anabolics. There's a lot of good stories there, a lot of crazy stories, funny stories, but I really just want you guys to understand how I got to this space, because that's the question I get asked a lot. Like, Brandon, how do you know so much about this? How is your whole practice? How does it run so smoothly? Why do so many patients choose you? It's because of open dialogue like this. They know what I've taken, what I've done. I mean, starting testosterone endogenously at 19 is extremely young. I'm 29 years old now. Been on it for about 10 years. I've never taken a break, maybe for about 4 to 5 months when I was like in Colorado for other reasons. But yeah, and that was horrible. I will never do that again, never coming off of it. But yeah, we'll be able to dive into some cool topics, fertility, other side effects I dealt with, how I overcame them, using my practice and my license, for example, to do this the right way, and all of that. So now I've pretty much answered why I started the practice, how I became a nurse practitioner, that whole deal there, what it really drove me to. I knew that I was going to own one of these clinics before I even started nurse practitioner school. I was already studying. I'm very big into a lot of the lobbying and political side of nursing. So I knew you could already own a practice as a nurse practitioner. Nurse practitioners are becoming autonomous or, practicing independently in FPA states, full practice authority states. So I already had this all figured out long before. I knew my branding behind it as the Alpha NP, K&B Medical Center with Candy. We had a lot of that figured out basically before I even applied to NP school. But now the next question is, why the Alpha NP podcast, and what direction are we going to be doing with that more directly? So the main other question we're going to now touch is, why the Alpha NP podcast? What was my direction with this? I'm already on Instagram. I talk to you guys a lot over the phone, over text. We have a very casual type of relationship in this practice where, the patient is able to talk to their nurse practitioner very one-on-one. This is to take it to the next level. I want to be able to engage with you guys. A lot of times, with your standard appointments, not in my practice, but with other practices, you just don't get that time. I've even heard of practices that charge additional on top of their TRT or whatever their subscription services or memberships are. They charge to have a phone call, which is fucking absurd. With the nurse practitioner, physician, or PA. So aside from that, there's a lot of good topics. I like the one-on-one with you guys. So, I definitely want you to tune in. If you find this interesting, we're going to be talking about everything. This won't just be medical related. We will have a big portion is going to be medical related, but this is going to be everything from lifestyle to businesses to overall well-being, personal development and growth. I think this all goes hand in hand on a lot of my mission statement behind my practice and how I feel about testosterone in males of all ages, even younger males. So that's going to be that. I think it's going to be good. You guys will be able to watch this. We're going to crop a lot of this on Reels, so you'll see a lot of these clips. If it's something you like, you can always go watch the full podcast. We're going to be on, Mark, what are we going to be on? Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, I'd say safely. And then, the Instagram Reels for the short form content. So yeah, that'll be the main direction. You guys will be able to really hear. We're going to talk about a lot of topics. I can only talk on Instagram for so long before it's cut off or I'm trying to condense it. I can never really have dialogue. So something I'll add in here at this point before I forget is, if there's topics that you guys want me to talk about, shoot me the DM, send me a text message, be like, yo, Brandon, this is something I'd really like to talk about, or I'd really like to hear your opinion on it. And we will talk about it. I'm going to always try to be very unbiased on my way of thinking. I obviously love testosterone, but testosterone, believe it or not, I don't think is for everybody. I think majority, but I don't think every patient. There's never a 100% in the medical world when it comes to anything. There are circumstances when I do think, patients need to stay away from things for various reasons. And that's what we're here for. We're here to discuss it. We're here to talk about it. This is a very open channel, as you can see. We're not censoring anything. I'm not even scripted. To be honest, I had a script that I had AI kind of help guide me with. And I was trying to read it. I was like, I can't even do this. It's just more for talking points to remember. When we start this, I had this conversation with Mark. He's doing all the editing for this, the uploading, everything. And I was like, dude, I'm not even going to come onto this scripted. We're going to keep this very raw, very open. Maybe I make some mistakes, maybe I don't, but that's the whole point of it. To pretend as if you were at my practice, you were sitting in front of me and we were having a conversation or a discussion. We're also going to be having on guests. So this one's solo. I'm here, but we're going to be at the location here in Fort Myers. I will be having guests from all over, super interesting individuals, whether it's nurse practitioners, physicians, PAs, pharmacists, to whether it's, maybe it's athletes, maybe it's entrepreneurs, maybe it's psychologists. Maybe people that aren't even licensed. Maybe I might even have real estate agents. We might have all types of people on here. I think people that have very interesting aspects of life and, a lot to do with personal development, and how we'll always tie that back into men's health in a sense. So this podcast will be all over the place. It is not going to just be testosterone. That is obviously what we do, but I think there's a lot of interesting topics on how testosterone influences males and females in development in all areas of life. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. I think this is going to be a very good open dialogue. I think it's interesting. I am always open. Send in your questions, send in your topics, send in people that you think would be interesting. I have no problem flying people out, getting them here in Fort Myers if, they're definitely someone that we could have a good conversation with. So I definitely have some people already lined up. Definitely some interesting stories. A lot of these people are going to be people that are either on treatment or are in this space. We're definitely going to tackle the basics first on testosterone. You've heard my journey. So now the next step is going to be what are we going to dive in with testosterone in terms of, patient use, and, what do I believe is good starting protocols and that whole type of thing, as well as I will be answering questions on this first one. I've already received some questions through the DMs, so I definitely will be addressing that part. And then, so this is going to be pretty much the closing of the first episode of the Alpha NP podcast. I think I did a decent job on the first episode. I've told you guys a little bit about my history, a little bit about my journey through, nursing school, becoming a nurse practitioner, and why we started the practice, the plan behind it, specifically in this space that's just so neglected. So many people are unhappy with their overall health, their medical treatments, their offices, rushed 15-minute appointments. So, you definitely, I hope I did a good job of explaining how we got to where we are today and why we're starting this podcast, so that I can, talk to you guys a little more direct, answer you one-on-one questions you guys might have, and that whole type of deal. So we'll keep this very casual. I'm looking forward to the start of this, which is really going to be our official episode 1, I would say, where we dive into more content, topics, education, medical and healthcare field, as well as, a lot of my patients. So I'm looking forward to it, and I appreciate it. Make sure to follow, like, and subscribe.